Hi, my name is Phil. I like to talk about politics, and in this video what I'd like to go through, now that Boris Johnson is going to be effectively finished as Prime Minister, what are the different options for Brexit? Because no deal Brexit is still a credible threat, not least of which because France is still threatening to veto another extension. But first, if you find yourself enjoying the video, then please click the like button and subscribe to the channel. So first of all, for those who are still thinking, but if Boris Johnson still drives through a no-deal Brexit, then he'll be saved. Now, let me explain what my thinking is on this. So there are, from Boris Johnson's point of view, three possible outcomes. The first is that we get the extension. Makes no difference what role Boris Johnson plays in this. If that extension, goes beyond October the 31st, he is finished. Exposed as someone who can't get us out on the deadline, even when he shut Parliament down for 5 weeks. What hope will he ever have of taking us out of the EU when Parliament has even more time to prepare for whatever the future extension happens to be? So his support will melt, the Brexit party will rise again, and that'll be it. He'll be done for. And there will be a general election this year, come what may. At that point, he won't want one because he will lose quite badly. The second possible outcome is that Boris Johnson breaks the law, is charged and goes to prison for a year or two. Political career over, and he won't be able to stand as an MP until his sentence is over, so he'd definitely be out of the way for a few years at least, and even afterwards, well, the Conservatives are hardly likely to elect a leader who has been imprisoned for such a duration. And the third possible outcome is that Johnson drives through this no deal, but he gets away with the legal consequences as he has so far. But he's still finished even then, because at the moment he is desperate for this general election in October. Why? Amongst other reasons, because he wants to have it before people really see what a no-deal Brexit is. If it's late November, and as long as everyone stands firm this Monday, which they're going to, there can't now be a general election before late November. That's plenty of time for people to see two things. The first of which is that impact of a no-deal Brexit on the UK. The government's own report says there will be panic, public panic within 2 weeks. And the second thing, they will also see, that when we leave the EU, Johnson's whole strategy is we need to show that we're serious about leaving the EU without a deal, and then they'll come crawling for a deal. Well, you can't get much more serious about threatening a no deal than leaving with no deal. So if we leave with no deal after a few weeks, people will see that, actually, look at it, the EU aren't coming begging us for a deal after all. They're waiting for us to ring them. So he will be completely snookered in that general election. And again, political career over. The other thing is, people seem to think that Dominic Cummings may have a cunning plan. Okay, he has that reputation, but I would say think again. He is reported to have told staff to play it cool like the Fonzie, because their plan is to wait for their opponents to melt. But their opponents have actually suddenly started to hold their nerve at long last. They are not being baited into an October general election, and they will of course also be planning for Johnson's intended criminality later next month. So the idea of the opposition suddenly wilting away now is not impossible, but it is pretty incredible. So Johnson is gone. But what are the possible outcomes still for Brexit? So it's not smooth running from the point of view of people who desperately don't want a no deal, whether it's because you'd rather stay in the EU or you do want to leave, but not with no deal. So Boris Johnson is claiming that he will disregard the bill that Parliament has just passed and is about to be written into law Monday. Now, he's not claiming that he will break the law. In fact, he and other ministers have been saying, of course this government is going to obey the law. Of course we are. Their argument is, but Boris Johnson believes he can disregard some or all of this bill, which naturally means the same thing as intended to break the law. But it's just designed simply to fool people who don't seem to be aware that acts of Parliament are the law. That's how laws are determined. He will certainly test it, you would think. I absolutely believe he will test it. There will be an emergency court case. Johnson, when that court says, no, this is the law, you have to do this, Prime Minister, he may still defy it. Parliament will then have to replace him. That will take a few days. It takes 1 day for the Leader of the Opposition to call a vote of no confidence. They would debate and vote on it in the next day and probably in the evening. and then it takes the next day to actually form the new government for the new Prime Minister to then write that letter. And Parliament has to, it's got basically 6 weeks now, it has to agree on who that replacement is going to be. Now, there isn't a massive political game of chicken here. This is probably what Dominic Cummings is pinning his entire hopes on. The thing is, even if he's pinning his hopes on the fact that they won't be able to agree on who should take over from Johnson, that doesn't save Boris Johnson. But then again, it's arguable that Dominic Cummings doesn't care about that. But certainly, if Jeremy Corbyn continues to insist that he has to be that caretaker Prime Minister and other parties insist that he must not, then we end up with a situation where, we could still end up going out with no deal, because the only way to get that extension is definitely to replace Boris Johnson if he insists on not following the law. And, as I say, he will still lose out of it, but, so will we. So will everyone. Now, here's the thing. Even if Parliament replaces Johnson, there is still that query, because remember, it's not just up to us to get an extension. There are 27 other member states. And France are being a bit snippy about it at the moment. I don't say that in an offensive way, because it's understandable in some ways. And they're saying that they won't grant an extension under the current circumstances. But it depends on exactly what they mean by those current circumstances. If those current circumstances are that you seem to have an idiot for a Prime Minister, then we should be okay, because if Boris Johnson does refuse to write that letter, then he won't be the Prime Minister when the new Prime Minister eventually does write that letter. So there still remains the possibility that France will go, oh, you seem to have a more sensible Prime Minister now. Okay, that's fine. The other thing is they're talking about the fact that France don't want to keep granting a new extension every 3 months. So what are they attacking there? Is it the fact that this bill requests an extension for the end of January? Are they saying, well, we don't want to keep doing this every few months? Does it mean we'll give you a year? We'll give you an extension every year until you sort yourself out. That's not as much effort on our part. We can just forget about it for a year. In which case, what will happen is they will reject our request for an extension of January the 31st, 2020, and give us an alternative of, say, late October 2020. Boris Johnson, people are saying, oh, well, Boris Johnson could then veto that, use the British veto to veto that. He can't. This bill says that he must accept it. And Parliament, within 2 days, Parliament has to vote on it. So Parliament will, of course, vote in favour of it. They'll vote in favour of any extension. Hint to the EU, give us an extension of 99 years. Parliament will vote for it. They'll accept anything. We just don't want to go out with no deal. Give us a ridiculously long extension if necessary. Give us an extension for 7 years. That way we have to, pay fully a part of the budget. We don't mess about with the budget if necessary, if that's the sticking point as well. Whatever. Don't mind. And, so that could be the sticking point, in which case that goes away as well. So if it's that France just wants a longer extension, that should be okay. If they just don't want Boris Johnson as Prime Minister, that should be okay. If they're saying, we want you to do something, then that should be okay too, because we are definitely having a general election. We are having that general election in November. We're just not having it in October. We're not going to have it. We were never going to have it before the summit as well. I know Boris Johnson was saying he wanted to have this before the summit. He didn't. And I know some people are saying, particularly at the weekend, it was leaked that Boris Johnson sort of was thinking about mid-October, so that it would stop a lot of students voting, who, of course, are largely young and pro-European. So it was basically because at the moment there's a load of students going to university. They will want to vote where they're studying because they won't be at home, but they have to be able to register in their new city. I think this is why we've had, over the last 3 days of last week, 200,000 people registering to vote, most of whom are the young people. So, yes, I think... so that's credible, but I still don't think he wanted the 15th. I think he just wanted to say it was for the 15th and then change it to the 31st so that Parliament was dissolved during that period of time when they'd be trying to get him to write that letter. I still think that was the most likely outcome. So as everyone else keeps saying, you can't trust Johnson on this. You can't trust him on anything. Even his own brother doesn't trust him, of course. So, scenario then. Johnson is replaced. I mean, that's a big if, but it should happen. Johnson's replaced. New Prime Minister sends the letter. France still vetoes it. They still say, no, we're not happy. Even though that new Prime Minister will give them assurances that there's going to be a general election in the next month. Let's say that's still not good enough, because that's their choice. That's up to them. I'd be more likely to believe it of Germany, ironically, because people keep pointing out that Germany now believes that it would do better with a no deal now, economically, than just this endless uncertainty. But that's not the case for France. France does suffer economically with a no deal, definitely. I think it's a political decision with President Macron at the moment. So let's say they veto it for whatever reason, or someone else does, who knows. And then Parliament's faced with revoke or let us go out with no deal. At that point, there will be a political decision made, ultimately by Jeremy Corbyn. Obviously, if it comes to the MPs vote to revoke, those rebel MPs, those Tory rebels, will definitely vote to revoke. They haven't gone through fire and water like this to see us crash out with no deal just because of something like this that they can still stop. So they would want to vote for revoke. The Lib Dems, of course, would. The Green Party would. The SNP would. The Plaid Cymru would. It would be down to the Labour leadership. How would he whip his MPs? I mean, some will, rebel either way anyway. But how will he get... Because he needs the vast majority of his MPs to vote for this. Because obviously Johnson would vote, tell them not to revoke. He would whip his MPs not to vote, to revoke. It depends. On the one hand, I think it depends on blame. Does Jeremy Corbyn think that he can pin all the blame on the Conservatives for this? Or does he think he would get blame from the other faction that he still thinks vote Labour somehow for not going out? Because this would be massive ammunition for, say, the Brexit Party. The way the Brexiteers will spin this is they'll say that this was a stitch-up between the EU and the treacherous Parliament. That actually a few years ago they said we wanted to leave the EU so our Parliament can make decisions. But now apparently they don't want them to do that. That's the narrative, and that would be very powerful. Certainly there would be political fallout from doing this. Obviously they would have to then go full on with a second referendum. And, no messing about. Second referendum would absolutely be needed immediately before the political fallout gets too bad. And it would at least mean that referendum wouldn't be like the first one. It wouldn't be like for some aimless outcomes. It would be, automatically applied. It would actually be a binding referendum because Parliament would have to do something what Labour have been saying we should be doing for ages, which is to agree exactly the terms of our withdrawal and then put it to the people who remain as an option. So you have two questions, or this is how I would do it, two questions. First question, do you want to leave the EU? Do you want to remain a member of the EU? Second question, if the vote is to leave the EU, do you want to leave with the withdrawal agreement or do you want to leave with no deal? Now, I know people are saying it'd be reckless to put no deal on it, but I think it's absolutely fine. I think there is zero danger of that being the outcome. Because think about it this way. First of all, it's only about roughly, at best, half of people who want to leave the EU want to leave without a deal. And you've got to remember, everyone will be voting on that second question. That will include everyone who wants to remain. If I'm voting on it, I will, of course, vote to remain. On the second question, I'll vote for the withdrawal agreement because it's better than no deal. So you'll have all of the people who want to remain voting for the withdrawal agreement, as well as about half the people voting to leave as well. The no deal going through, zero chance. It's politically very safe to put it on there. It's just, if you're going to accept it as a possible outcome, it's irresponsible, but it's the only way to shut the Brexiteers up. So there would be that possibility as well, but I'll tell you what, Parliament desperately do not want to have to revoke before we've had another referendum. At the moment, are they going to go for a referendum? I think at the moment what is most likely, we have to replace Boris Johnson. Corbyn will then want a general election. Lots of other parties want there to be a public vote, then a general election. He wants that. I'm not sure he'll be swayed on that. I think it'll be a general election in November. After which, there's a decent chance that the Conservatives will not be able to form a government. In fact, a very good chance they won't be able to form a government. But we don't know that. But let's say. in which case then, you know, they can get on with the idea of a public vote. Because even if Corbyn says he wants to arrange a different withdrawal agreement, obviously it's only the political declaration that can be changed, he can do that whilst getting the wheels rolling on the public vote as well. You know, because if it's only the political declaration he wants to change, as people have pointed out, it shouldn't take him long to do that. He could do that in a few months, couldn't he? And then, you know, get the public vote out there next year, and then it's all done. Either way, it's all done and dusted by the end of next year. That is the hope. But anyway, those are the outcomes as I see them. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the Patreon link if you'd like to support the channel further. Until next time, I'll see you later.